All right, my name is Preston Fort, and today I'm presenting on the Texas death penalty, focusing on the pros and cons of how the system works in our state. So, Texas has a long history with capital punishment, as you can see by this little graph I have here of executions by state. As you can see, it's kind of hard because it is blurry, but the dark red means over 100 executions since 1977 to 2013, and only three states reached that, with Virginia and Oklahoma and Texas. Um, and as you can see, Oklahoma and Virginia barely reached that 100 mark, whereas Texas is well over 400, with 12 years missing from our timeline, obviously. So this is quite a large deal in Texas. So, today my goal is to explain the background and the pros and cons on each side, and why this issue still plays an important role in Texas politics today. All right, so let's move forward to the background. So, to understand the debate, I think it helps to look at the history. So, in 1924, Texas carried out its first execution by electric chair, uh, which obviously is a big moment in Texas for capital punishment. And then in 1976, there's kind of a big gap here. It gets Texas reinstates the death penalty after a national pause in 1972. So it gets reinstated in 1976. Then there is a jump about for 6 years to 1982, which is, as you can see down here in this Texas execution totals since 1976. There were no executions for 6 years. Sorry. And then in 1982, there was one, and that was a big moment in Texas because Texas was the first state to execute someone with lethal injection. Why is that a big deal? Because lethal injection is probably the most common method that we use still to this day. So now let's go through some stats for Texas in executions. Texas leads all states in executions since 1976 with 595. Another important point is that death sentences aren't spread evenly across the state. So most come from a small number of counties, such as Harris County, right here, which alone accounts for 298 death row inmates. Which is almost triple the next closest county, which is Dallas, with 108. So let's move on to the next slide, which is the pros. So when we look at arguments in favor of the death penalty, a major one is the justice. Many people feel that for the most extreme crimes, such as murder, this punishment should match the severity. So according to surveys, about 64% of people believe someone who commits certain violent crimes, such as murder or other violent crimes that I'm not going to mention because I don't want to, but those crimes also deserve the death penalty. Supporters also point to deterrence. So this is not really backed up by anything, but to me, it's like a logical sense. The idea behind this is basically when something bad happens to somebody, you're more likely to not do that thing, right? So, like, if someone murders somebody and then they die because of it or they get executed, more people are less likely to kill. That's a logical idea, right? It's kind of the idea of being put in timeout as a child. If you do something bad and you get put in timeout, the goal as a parent is to put you in timeout so then you don't do that thing again and take away something from you. Another pro is the public support. About 60% of Americans favor the death penalty. And then the last thing is closure. So a sense of justice for a loved one is kind of the thing I pointed out the most. So for a family, maybe knowing that the person that killed your loved one is getting the death penalty could be a sense of closure for them, more than just knowing that that person is still alive in prison. All right, so moving to the cons. So probably the biggest con to execution is the risk of wrongful conviction. So even with DNA and the modern tools that we have at our disposal, mistakes can still happen. And about 78% of people believe there's at least some chance an innocent person could be executed wrongly. Another key argument is that there's no proven deterrent effect. So while the idea sounds logical, most people, around 63%, do not believe the death penalty actually deters crime. And many individuals who commit capital murder aren't thinking rationally in the moment, obviously, because a rational person would not kill somebody, or logically thinking that way. Another major concern is about the fairness. So 56% of people believe Black Americans are more likely to receive the death penalty than white Americans for committing similar crimes. Geography matters too. As we saw earlier, a small number of counties sentence people to death much more often. And the last con I have, and it's also a big one, is the cost. So death penalty trials cost a lot more in comparison to a life sentence trial, with probably the biggest reason being death penalty trials are significantly longer. So after hearing both the pros and the cons, let's go ahead and look at the impact of both. So the death penalty remains a very divisive issue in Texas, with supporters emphasizing mainly justice and retribution, whereas non-supporters emphasize a risk of wrongful conviction, higher costs, and fairness, as well as a lack of deterrence of committing these crimes. Public opinion is also fairly split, as you can see over here on this graph. It's about 60% in favor of the death penalty, compared to around 40% opposing it. So it's not like it's easily decisive of like, obviously this is right or obviously this is wrong, even though a majority recognize it as favorable. As you can see down here, 78% still see the risk of an innocent person being executed. So obviously there are still risks that people notice. And this graph right here showing the 60-40%, it's so close together in the way of, the public is so split. That's why we still see arguments about the death penalty in Texas today. And then obviously any policy that involves taking someone's life, even when the crime is extreme or it seems justified, there's naturally going to have strong arguments on both sides on whether it's right or wrong. And that's why the death penalty continues to be a major issue in Texas politics today. And yeah. These are my sources I use for my information, including the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the Death Penalty Information Center, and Pew Research Center. And yeah, thank you for listening.